So the question today is, what's the difference between marketing communications, advertising, and growth? But why me? Why should I answer this question? Well, actually, I've worked in all four roles. I've worked at advertising agencies like Saatchi & Saatchi and McCann Erickson. I've worked as a marketing person on the client side for B2B, B2C, and B2G firms. I've also worked and started my own advertising agency from scratch. And I've also lived in San Francisco working for a Silicon Valley tech firm in a growth role. And this was at a tech company funded by Joe Lonsdale, one of the heads of Palantir. Let's first start with marketing. And marketing is a relatively new discipline in terms of the history of business. And traditional marketers were trained in the 4 Ps: product, place, price, and promotion. And most people will think of marketing, they automatically think of promotions, and within promotions, advertising. But this is because it's the most culturally popular promotional channel. Marketing, or strategic marketing, is much more than that. It's a discipline that concerns itself with the market and acts as a conduit between the organization and the market forces within which it operates. But marketing all-rounders have a skill set that's a lot more than just creating ads. They'll look at things like distribution models, wholesale, reseller arrangements, affiliate, referral networks, and much more. And traditional marketers will also look at product marketing. They will work with the marketing research team, which then flows into R&D cycles. And it's all about ensuring the product the company is selling is attuned to the wants of the market. Pricing strategies is another critical area. And did you know there's a strong correlation between high prices and perceptions of product quality, regardless of the actual quality of the product being sold? In a service sector context, marketing will also specialize in things like the brand contact points that the customer will engage with, and they'll be optimizing them. Things like customer service, onboarding, etc. And last but not least, there's promotions. And this is what everybody thinks marketing is. Promotions is just another word for marketing communications. They include things like advertising, social media, emails, direct mail, publicity, PR, etc., etc. We go on all day. I've identified over 42 different channels. And the dominance of marketing's advertising perceptions is reinforced by all these shows that we see, like the 1950s Mad Men era. And this is formed what Scott Galloway's called the advertising industrial complex. And it's a very dominant force within the industry, but as you'll see later, it skews the perceptions of really good marketers. The media industry likes to talk about their business because their business model is heavily reliant on advertising. So it's in their interest to reinforce this belief that advertising is an essential requirement to business success. When people think about the term advertising, what they're really referring to is a section of this promotional media construct called paid media. But there's actually 3 types of media. Paid media is one, but there's also owned media and earned media. Let's talk about paid media first. Paid media is when you explicitly pay other people to mention your brand to their audiences. You're paying to leverage somebody else's medium and somebody else's audience, which they have curated. You're basically leasing temporary access to that audience at a cost. For example, if you're a TV station, the medium is TV. The audience are the viewers, and as an advertiser, you're booking a little portion and access to those viewers at any one time, where you can communicate your message. The same thing goes for Google. When someone searches for a word on Google, you can pay there and you're renting or leasing that space. So other examples: TV commercials, outdoor billboards, sponsored posts on Facebook, display ads which appear in the middle of the news article, even perhaps the ad that appeared before you watched this video on YouTube. In lots of countries, though, you need to explicitly disclose the fact that the advertiser is paying for this, and you have to mark it as sponsored or hashtag ad or something like that. And there's laws which govern this process and prevent false advertising. Earned media. This is the second type of media, and this is where the lines can get a tiny bit blurry between what's paid and what's free. Earned media is when you persuade other people to talk about you. The exposure you're getting has been earned, and typically this is when you use the power of publicity to convince other people to talk about your brand and product. The most famous example would be the use of a press release, which is sent out to reporters in the hope that they'll publish a story which includes a mention of your brand. All that publishers really do is they get these stories that have been written by commercial brands and pass it off as their own work. It's rare, actually, for journalists to write a story unless it's political editorial. Most larger brands will have a public relations or publicity department, or they'll use an agency. And they use these people to stimulate this kind of coverage. It would be naive to think, though, that TV stations, newspapers, YouTubers, and other channels are simply sitting there waiting to give exposure to brands for free. That's not how it works. Usually there's some kind of payment that takes place, but the source can be less direct. The publisher may get, for example, free products or perks or indirect payments or tickets to events, or sometimes the coverage is included on the back of a paid advertising deal at a much larger cost. When you get to publicity, there's a simple demand-supply problem. There's always more brands trying to get free exposure than there is space. So as you can imagine, a lot of persuasion and coercion goes on in the background. A lot of influencers on social media are getting paid in the background, but they don't disclose it on their posts. Earned media is more persuasive than paid media because customers view the credibility of the source message a lot higher than they do with paid media. When you have somebody else talking about your product that isn't from that company, people tend to trust it more. And every brand is going to say that their product is awesome, that it's the best and you should buy it. You'll never hear the opposite. So we as customers immediately tune out and disregard the credibility of that message. Here's a good example. Let's pretend you're at a bar and you see a nice man or woman that you want to pick up. You're always going to say to them, "Oh, I'm awesome. You should go out with me." But if that person heard from their nearby friend who they trust that, "Oh, I'm awesome," the message would have a lot more influence on their decision to accept your later proposition. So finally, the third type of media is owned media. And this is where you control the medium and curate your own audience. You can get a chance to talk at your target market directly through this channel at zero or very low cost. And this really wasn't possible for quite a long time for businesses, apart from things like physical store signage, which they owned. But now, with the internet, companies can curate their own websites, they can create a following on social media, and even create their own YouTube shows. And once you've built a large enough audience, it can be a really cost-effective way to communicate to your market. An email list, for example, is really powerful if you have a good and big enough one for a lot of B2B companies. Earned and owned media is something that marketing-savvy companies like Tesla use to their advantage, and they use it to compensate completely for paid media. In fact, Tesla famously doesn't spend any money on paid media, and they recently fired their PR department as well. They are so good at product marketing and getting other people to talk about them that they don't need to spend money on those things. So do you think it's an accident that that window cracked on stage during the Cybertruck event? That was no accident. That was staged so they could milk the story that ensued afterwards. And do you think they put a Tesla into space just for fun? That story intentionally reached millions of people all around the world for free. And do you think that Elon Musk hasn't actively spent resources on curating a following on Twitter of 54 million different people? He knows how to use owned and earned media to his advantage. An important thing to note here, though, is that a lot of brands who rely on marketing or advertising agencies will show an innate bias towards paid media at the expense and the opportunity sometimes of owned and earned media. And this is because owned and earned media is less scalable and often more difficult. And this is why many marketers, their only skill set is on the paid media marketing communication side of the discipline. Advertising agencies only sell paid media, so the industry tends to only talk about paid media, which further reinforces this belief that marketing is advertising. So hopefully that sort of clears up what the difference between marketing communications, promotional media, and advertising is. So what is growth then? It's actually a pretty strange term, and it's really what marketing departments used to do to grow the brand. But there's a huge difference between what I would call a marketer and a growth marketer. The growth process was really born from the Silicon Valley tech growth process. And this is a general process that's nothing new, but ironically, it's sort of coming back full circle to what the strategic marketing process used to be. And the catalyst for growth's recent popularity was the publication of Sean Ellis's book, Hacking Growth, in 2017. And he's sort of the first person that's attributed with popularizing this term back in 2010. And I visited Sean actually in LA a few years ago, but that's a story for another day. Ironically, he admits that he's not a huge fan of the term growth hacking, but it's still quite an important concept to understand because that's where the growth process came from. And if you read the book, you'll notice that he's worked with Dropbox in the early days to create a very powerful user referral system, which caused usage to explode. And Peter Thiel and Elon Musk's PayPal story is full of growth hacks that were famous for finding exploits in the systems of eBay and using it to their own advantage. And Hotmail was very famous back in the day for adding a hyperlink at the bottom of every email, which encouraged people who didn't use Hotmail to sign up for free. Airbnb used an automatic Craigslist listing program to give exposure to some of their properties. And that was one of the big catalysts behind their early growth. And growth hacking was all about finding lower cost ways of harnessing the internet's power of distribution and network effects. Core to this discipline is thinking full funnel and holistically about all the different ways a company could acquire more customers. It's less about ad campaigns or creating videos or building brand awareness or talking about how awesome your product is. It's more focusing on the outcome, not the upstream actions that you're taking, and reverse engineering that growth back into your process. An important thing to note here is the bad rap that the ad industry got during the dot-com bubble, which burst in 2001. A lot of very hyped up internet companies were spending big on traditional ads and ad agencies, only for a lot of those strategies to completely fail at supporting any of these viable business models. The marketing industry got a really bad name with the internet culture at the time, and it became a very dirty word. So traditionally in Silicon Valley, the business culture is dominated by technically minded engineer types who tend to have a natural hatred for the marketing function anyway. Add on top this frustration with the dot-com bust, and you have a sentiment that's pretty dominant to this day. And this bias flows into the approach that they make when growing companies. This made them sort of look, instead of to the ad agency world, it made them look towards pursuing methods to grow companies other than relying on paid media. And a lot of these engineer-dominated companies did not hire a marketing person, and they were very successful in growing companies without them. When you work in a tech firm in a growth role, you're working very closely with the product team, which generally consists of software engineers and product managers. And you create these cross-functional teams with engineers, with product, with design, sometimes marketing. And the growth lead will be tasked with optimizing some form of growth metric that pushes the whole company forward. And this is generally things that are related to customer acquisition, product usage, customer retention, revenue growth, etc. Your focus isn't on marketing communications output or building brand awareness. You're completely focused on optimizing metrics which have a stronger relationship with the core business growth metrics, things that really push the company forward. And to do that at a tech company, you need to have a pretty reasonably high level of technical knowledge. And a lot of older, more traditional marketers who are only exposed to that sort of agency world don't have a high enough level of technical understanding to be useful in this sense. Growth marketers need to be very savvy with UX and UI concepts. They need to be able to have a high knowledge of digital analytics programs. They need to be literate in identifying user behavior and how to manipulate that to their advantage. They need to have a really good grounding in software engineering, and at least at a sort of architectural or higher concept level. And they need to be able to do things like SQL queries in the database, extracting information out from there, analyzing it, and using that to the whole team's advantage. They'll also need to create landing pages, update the website, buy data from data providers, set up communication automation sequences, CRMs, sales enablement, defining SQLs or MQLs, lead scoring, integrations into other systems, split testing, pricing pages, product feature releases and discussions, striking reseller deals, forging strategic partnerships, creating referral programs, all these other things that a lot of traditional marketers won't ever be exposed to. So as you can see, the skill set of a growth person is a lot more varied than just marketing, comms, or advertising. They do have their own biases and blind spots as well, though. They tend to naturally skew towards a preference for digital marketing channels, and they really don't know much about how brands work or the branding process in general. So as you can see, ironically, growth is essentially what marketing used to be in terms of the 4 Ps. But as ad agencies took hold, a lot of marketers were separated from those other Ps, and Silicon Valley hated the word marketing so much they had to rebrand it to growth. So we've kind of almost gone full circle. And again, these are just terms. It's really the work that matters. And if you understand marketing fundamentals, these haven't changed a lot over the years. You'll still be affected no matter what role you go into, B2B, B2C, tech, or non-tech. So if you understand these first principles, you really can't go wrong. And where people on all sides of the spectrum go wrong is they lack exposure to other industry sectors or different sized companies, and therefore their perspective is incomplete. Big brand, old school marketers think the secret to growth involves lots of paid media via, a killer advertising campaign executed by a large reputable ad agency, because that's what they've been exposed to. And if you're a marketer working in a large CPG firm, or a mature firm, you might only be exposed to a very small specialist niche area that concerns itself with marketing communications. And because all those distribution channels are set up already, you've got pricing over there with the finance group, you've got your product team over there doing R&D and market research, and you're very separated from these other Ps. So if that person then took their skill set and then they worked for a tech firm, they're going to have this massive weakness and blind spots in the required skill set. They would never consider, for example, creating a referral program. They wouldn't have tactical pricing experience. They wouldn't understand how distribution works on the internet. They would think that secret to growth is like a 15 or 30-second video commercial. On the flip side though, some growth people have also been overexposed to digital marketing, and they don't see the glaring opportunity with traditional media channels. They don't understand brand concepts like mental availability or the law of double jeopardy. And you've probably seen some tech companies now that are exhausting a lot of the yields from these digital channels, and their growth has plateaued. And ironically, now they're hiring brand marketing roles and turning back towards traditional marketing departments as the tech scene becomes more competitive. Just the other day, I was walking on the street and I saw an outdoor ad for Canva. So the tide is turning. Growth is becoming more like marketing every day. But I think the marketing industry establishment still has a massive bias towards paid media. And there's this symbiotic relationship that publishers have with advertising agencies and their client brands that they represent. And this distorts the market and forces brands to allocate more towards paid media than they probably should. And there's a whole generation of marketers who have become so detached from the real drivers of business growth that they mistakenly believe that paid media channels are the only things that a company should concentrate on. This generation doesn't have exposure to the sales department, for example. They don't have exposure to pricing, product, or distribution. All they can do is marketing communications. And a lot of brands that spend a lot on advertising spend that money because they can, because they always have, or they're trying to defend market share rather than gain market share. And a lot of big brand marketers are operating in hyper-competitive areas where you need to advertise to get any growth at all, or even sustain the market share you have. So what is lost in this skill set is getting a brand big in the first place, and that's growth. And that requires a very different approach. Often it doesn't involve spending a lot of money on paid media. I actually asked Byron Sharp about this from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, and I asked him, did brands become big by spending lots on advertising, or do they spend lots on advertising because they're actually big? And he sort of said it depends, but basically sided with the latter option. In other words, big brands spend lots on advertising because they can and because they're big. Sometimes a lot of marketers who are working for bigger brands aren't exposed to smaller brands and the determinants that create growth in the first place. And a lot of these early stage things with smaller brands, the growth comes from partnerships, grubby, door-to-door knocking, cold calling, lead generation, events, activities, webinars, and you can get really divorced from the growth drivers that get small brands big. And these are the things that really drive small brands into bigger brands. Growth is also different to marketing because of the different incentive structures that apply in terms of remuneration. So when you work as a marketer, you tend to get a base salary, and there tends to be no direct incentive for that role to improve the bottom line of the company. There's only an incentive not to be fired. So they are very detached from being able to affect the revenue and profit figures. Whereas when you work in a growth role, especially at an early stage startup, a lot of your salary package may come in the form of options, which you can later cash in. There might even be some sort of equity share on the table too. And with bigger, larger tech companies that have already gone public, you may even receive a big chunk of your salary in terms of publicly tradable shares. So you have a direct incentive, as do others in your growth team, to grow the company at all costs. And the more you grow, the more money you make. This makes for a very different dynamic in terms of incentives than a traditional marketing department. Everybody at a growth role is thinking about cost-benefit trade-offs. They're looking for the lowest cost, most efficient ways to grow the business, not necessarily the highest cost ways that help them win advertising industry awards like a Cannes Lion. In growth teams, you tend to get less of that departmental friction and silos that plague more bureaucratic organizations. And as I mentioned before, this is really critical to grow a business because you need to work within multiple functions of product pricing, promotion, etc. Another big difference between growth and marketing is the mentality of this campaign mindset versus growth loops. And traditional marketers will think in campaigns. They think in brand campaigns, they think in yearly campaigns, quarterly campaigns, campaign. And this comes from the fact that campaigns is always what's been done. And that's because ad agencies sell campaigns via pitches to their clients. brand marketers also tend to have to win political favor. So a campaign essentially becomes their own mini project that they can put their face to and sell up the chain for political visibility. It has less to do with affecting revenue or profit for the company. So the playbook there is that you get some ideas from your vendors or consultants or agencies, you mash it all together into something that's sounds good to others and can be sold within the organization, and you package it up into a project and milk the political points. And each new marketing head has to prove that their former head didn't do something properly and that they have this new idea and they have to go to the agency, give me an idea, let's create this campaign around this buzzword, put a couple of cool sounding digital channels into the mix, you package it up and you sell it up to the board. And growth roles, in contrast, though, are more about this circular feedback process that includes like a flywheel momentum. And they think non-linear, always on, and compounding growth effects. And generally, it's about creating a circular process from data or research to strategy to tactical execution to measurement and then back around again. And they use each of these stages to improve the next stage. They think less about cross-sectional time periods and they think long-term compounding growth. They don't need to sell something that looks or sounds good up the board. They sell something that actually is good for the company. And each effort they leverage is to the benefit of the next effort. They don't rely on these external vendors to measure critical growth metrics. They own their own data and systems. They do strategic planning, and they often do execution as well internally. So they aren't separated from the benefits of that execution. And all the learnings and feedback is fed back into the benefit of the company. The principal agent problem also doesn't plague their projects because they don't rely on external agencies to execute. So hopefully this helps explain what the difference between growth, marketing, and advertising is all about. Ciao for now.